It's funny that the country was obsessed for years over Russian influence in our politics, Russian influence buying off our politicians or
Yep.
influencing our politicians or influencing our media or all the social media. They went nuts looking for Russian influence. And yet there is a ton of Israel influence all
Hmm.
throughout our government that is way worse than even what they thought, even in their minds, on how bad, the person that really thought Russia was really influencing, even the most that they thought in their mind, Israel's like double that of actual influence in our government, in our media. Can you break down some of that? Like, how do they buy support, I suppose, from our celebrities, influencers, and even our politicians?
Yeah, you were nice to say double that. It's about 100 billion times more influence from Israel than Russia. And I'll start off by saying this because it is important to some people. I am Jewish and I am an anti-Zionist Jew. And people need to understand that Zionism does not equal Judaism. Zionism is supporting the apartheid state of Israel. Judaism is a religion and a culture. And there are plenty of anti-Zionist Jews out there. And something else people might like to know is there are more Christian Zionists in the United States than there are Jews in the world.
Wow.
That just sheer numbers. One of the biggest supporters of Israel is evangelical Christians who believe all Jews need to be in Israel in order for the end times to come and for all of us to burn in hell, which seems like a weird reason to support us,
Well,
but
I
okay.
think you could convert,
It's
right?
a
Isn't
support
the
Israel.
idea that you can convert or burn in hell? I think that's,
Possibly, possibly.
yeah.
You might have an out. You might have an out there,
Right.
but
Yeah.
but anyway, that aside, yes, Israel. The Israel lobby is a general term used to refer to several of these lobbying firms. APAC is the best known of them, but there's others, NORPAC and others, and you can go to OpenSecrets.org right now, and you can look up who is funded by these Israel lobbies, these lobbying firms, and I'm talking about the politicians first, and get the list, and you'll see how much money is going to them, and it's large amounts of money. And the number one senator or former senator to receive money from the Israel lobby is none other than Genocide Joe Biden. So he's top of the list. Number three, even though she wasn't there nearly as long, Hillary Clinton. And then you look at some of the other ones, Mitch McConnell and Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi. The leadership of both sides largely heavily funded by the Israel lobby. And this is how you end up with these crazy one-sided votes of 412 to 1 in the House to quote unquote support Israel, and 97 to 0 in the Senate. And I have never seen a difference between what is happening in our government and the American people so severe as this. Something like 65% of the American people want a ceasefire in Gaza right now as this genocide goes on. And yet almost 100% of the White House and Congress are saying the opposite, are supporting the opposite, which is just crazy. But it's partially about funding. There are other aspects as well. The Israel lobby also heavily funds people to run against the
Yeah.
people in Congress they don't like. So, one example is a man who's running in the Senate was offered $20 million to run against Rashida Tlaib in the House. And $20 million, like, it's just crazy amounts of money thrown around. And then to get to the influencers and, some celebrities, is you can go read articles in some mainstream outlets about how $5,000 a person was offered to influencers, whatever that term means, but influencers on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, to do a video saying they support Israel after the attack on Gaza began. And I mean, $5,000 is a crazy amount of money for one video. And
Yeah.
then even just this is an influencers, but even just down to the level of those showing up to the pro-Israel rally in DC, which reportedly had 100,000 people or something. They were public advertisements or whatever saying that these various groups would pay each college student $250 just to attend that rally. And these amazing amounts of money are thrown around to make sure that the U.S. empire will continue to support, both with bombs and words and however else, Israel as they commit a full-on genocide. And I don't use that term lightly.
Right.
If you go to the Holocaust Memorial Fund's website and read the definition of genocide, which is created by the UN and other international groups, you will check off every single
Right.
box as to what's happening in Gaza right now.
Yeah, it is by definition a genocide. And I do know that people are really hesitant to use that, but you're right. If you look at the definition of genocide, it is. That is what's happening there. The whole goal is to get rid of this, or to whittle down. David Ben-Gurion said at one point that a stable Jewish nation can't be a stable Jewish nation if more than 20% are not Jewish. So when they first did the partition plan in 1948, 1947, in that time frame, when they did the partition, he looked at some of the regions that were supposed to be for Jews, that was partitioned for them, and he says, wait a minute, but there's like 40% Palestinians here, or Arabs, as he said it, and that won't make a stable Jewish society. So we have to whittle that number down to 20%. And then if you get it to 20%, that gives you cover, right? So you haven't genocided. How could you possibly call us a racist nation that's genociding when 20% of our population, and they use that number now all the time about Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. They say 20% of Israelis are actually Arabs. And it's interesting that Ben-Gurion actually said 20%, and this was back in the 40s, and then they still say 20% today, because he said that's the once you go above that, if you get to a third of the population being something different, then you've got a problem on your hands.
Right.
So
and that's why
that's
why the statement that they love, which is Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, or the most strong democracy in the Middle East, or whatever they say, it's complete bullshit, because you can't call it a democracy if you have an apartheid state where people are living in an open air prison, 2.2 million living in an open air prison. And so the idea that we are a democracy, but we've imprisoned a large portion of our population to make sure they can't vote, that's not a democracy.
Yeah. Well, they've got one half of the Palestinian people, a little less than half, the 2.2, blockaded completely in a ghetto, saying like, okay, yeah, you govern yourself, except we govern all of the resources. So we'll decide when you get resources, how many of the resources you're going to get. We'll decide if you can buy concrete, or if you can buy, get the permits you need for water systems or whatever. So they blame the Palestinians and say, well, you got all this money, but look what you did with it. All you did was, build smuggling tunnels, which it's like, well, how else were they? I mean, they built a lot of tunnels, not just, they call them terror tunnels, but a lot of it was for smuggling, because they couldn't get the resources they needed out of Israel. So they were trying to smuggle it in throughout the region. And then you've got the other 3 million in the West Bank who are under real serious military occupation, very debilitating military occupation. The thing that's the most disgusting to me in the West Bank is you've got hundreds of little communities. They call them settlements, right? But they're like towns, cities. Some of them are even as big as cities. And they've got them all throughout the West Bank. And they're scattered everywhere. So you've got two cities next to each other. One of them has the people living in that city have no ability to vote. They have no rights. And then the other group have all the rights and can vote in all the Israeli elections. And they're right next to each other. Their houses are looking at each other. And yet one group of people is completely oppressed. But the number, so here's the issue, is it's a number game, going back to that 20%. So there's 3 million in the West Bank, there's 2.2 million in Gaza, and there's 2 million inside of Israel right now who are Israeli Arabs. That's 7 million total, right? Well, the population of Israel is 9 million, except 2 million of them are Arabs. So if you subtract that 2 from the 9, it's 7 million. So there's 50%. 50% right. Palestinian, 50% Israeli. And if they put them all together, that's a problem, because they want to whittle that down to 20%. So they're somehow trying to figure out, how do we get, if they were to get rid of everybody in Gaza and deport them all out all around the world, which is their new plan, and then they incorporate it, and then they shoved out somehow 1 million from the West Bank into Jordan or something, and then they incorporated those 2 million. I don't know. It's going to be, what do you think they're going to do?
And it's straight up ethnic cleansing, and they've said some of this they've said publicly. I mean, the cabinet ministers have said things like "There's no innocent people in Gaza,"
Oh
which
yeah,
means
right.
apparently you can bomb children. I mean, that is a justification for genocide. We've seen think tank documents saying that their plan is to get all Gazans to move to surrounding countries, and that's why they keep trying to demand. They're using a stick and carrot routine to try and get Egypt to allow millions of people to basically live in tents in Egypt in the Sinai Desert, it's ethnic cleansing. It's saying we don't want these people here, and we're going to see how many we can kill and see if we can get the others to flee. And if you're a moral person, if you have a moral core larger than a tardigrade, then you go, oh, that sounds wrong. That sounds like not a good thing to do. And these people are only crammed. Gaza was, even before they blew up all the buildings, was one of the most tightly populated areas of the world. And the reason they're living there in the first place was because they were kicked out of their lands. It was already because of ethnic cleansing. I mean, the other cabinet ministers or higher ups in Israel have called this the second Nakba, which Nakba means catastrophe. And that's what people often call 1948 when 700,000 Palestinians were executed and millions more were forced off their lands and their ancestral lands. And that's how they ended up in Gaza to begin with, was because of ethnic cleansing. So.
You say that in one of your shows, you said Israel's losing. So what makes you feel like they're losing? A lot of people are saying, oh, Israel's crushing Hamas and winning, and Israel's going to win and be around forever. Where do you get that they're losing?
Yeah, I think they're losing in a lot of ways. Yes, they can, and I want to be clear on this. I'm not saying they couldn't just nuke all of Gaza. I am well aware that if they want to obliterate everyone in Gaza, the Israeli government is capable of doing that.
Well, it would come at a cost. I mean, the draft of nuclear fallout. It would ruin the land that they're wanting to live on. It would, it wouldn't be the best strategy if they're wanting to have those beach homes in Gaza that they keep fantasizing about.
Yeah, but outside of the number of people they're killing, they're losing this. Some of this they're losing militarily. I mean, the IDF notoriously is not great at ground wars, and it seems that many more have died than they're willing to really publicly say. But beyond just militarily, this is destroying support for the Israeli apartheid regime. Whatever support remained, which there was still a lot, I think it's being shredded, because there are the hardcore hardliners who, no matter what, Israel should just blow up anyone they want. But a lot of support for Israel was kind of a middle ground, low information person who said like, oh, Israel should be able to do what they want, and cool. Well, those people are all becoming more informed on this. They're seeing it's impossible not to see that this genocide is being committed. Over 20,000 people murdered. The estimates are at least 70% of those are women and children. And then you have 30% that, yes, they're men, but that doesn't mean they're all guilty of something.
Right.
So people are seeing this, and that big section of support for Israel is being heavily eroded by their own actions. Israel is destroying whatever support they had around the world. They're also increasing, and this is an important point, heavily increasing anti-Semitism, because they are, first of all, diluting what anti-Semitism means by saying any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. That's not true. And by doing that, you're diluting what the term means. And of course, they used it falsely to tear apart Jeremy Corbyn's career as one example. But so they're diluting it. But on top of that, people who are furious about the way Israel is acting are conflating sometimes Israel with just Judaism. Yeah. And of course, Israel uses all of the Jewish symbology, symbolism with the Jewish star and the flag and everything. So people go, oh, Jews are committing a genocide. Right. No, Israel is committing genocide. And there is a difference.
But Israel says we are Jews. We are for Jews. We're the home of Jews. All Jews are citizens of Israel, right? I mean, they actually basically blatantly state that they are speaking for all Jews and that they represent all Jews.
Of course they do, because they need that propaganda. They need people to be afraid to criticize Israel, because people will think that's anti-Semitic, when it is
Right.
not. It is just rational to be against a genocide. And it is just showing you are not morally bankrupt is all that is.
Yeah.
So they want you to, and I don't mean you, but everyone, they want you to conflate those two things. And saying it's the home of Jews is ridiculous. Jews have made homes in various places around the world for as long as history has been around. And, you know, saying that one spot that was, you know, gained in 1948 through war and empire and colonialism that's the only spot that's home for Jews. It's just nonsense.